Hi, hello, and welcome to the 6th episode of the Stage Manager Supply Co. podcast. We have no sponsor this episode, but instead are brought to you by Wallet Cards. Wallet Cards. Did you actually check if it fits in a wallet? My name is Claire, I am your host, and thank you for joining me today. As we start every podcast, I would first like to say that Black Lives Matter, and that I am creating this content on the traditional lands of the Kickapoo, Peoria, Potawatomi, Miami, and Sioux tribes. We will always start the podcast acknowledging the inequitable landscape and history of the United States, including but never limited to the fact that we are a country built on stolen land and developed on the backs of slaves. Stage Manager Supply Co. is my own attempt to bridge generations of systematic racism and oppression by making stage management arts education much more accessible. Today, I would like to highlight Planned Parenthood. In 1916, Planned Parenthood was founded on the idea that women should have the information and care they need to live strong, healthy lives and fulfill their dreams. Today, Planned Parenthood affiliates operate more than 600 health centers across the United States, and Planned Parenthood is the nation's leading provider and advocate of high-quality, affordable health care for all. Planned Parenthood is also the nation's largest provider of sex education. If you would like to learn more about Planned Parenthood and donate what you are able, you can find the link to their website in the episode description. 2 disclaimers before I introduce today's guest. Disclaimer number 1. The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the host, that is me, Claire, and the guest, and do not reflect the official policy or position of any other agency, production, organization, employer, or company. Disclaimer number 2. The host does not presume to be any sort of singular voice for stage management or stage managers. The views and opinions expressed by the host are extremely limited to the scope of her own experiences and are being widened each and every day. So now that we've grounded our work in the reality of the world around us, let me introduce you to our guest. Today's guest is Amanda Spooner. Amanda Spooner is an equity stage manager and arts educator, we stan, based in New York. She has worked on and off Broadway, regionally, on tour, on events, and in television. She is the founder of Year of the Stage Manager, a grassroots campaign meant to increase invisibility for stage managers, celebrate them, and educate people about what they do. With Year of the Stage Manager, Amanda curates free educational programming for both stage managers and their collaborators. She is the vice chair of the Stage Managers Association, an ambassador for the Parent Artist Advocacy League, and serves on council with Actors Equity Association. She has worked with Lincoln Center, New York Theater Workshop, Center Theater Group, Soho Rep, Playwright Horizon, Signature Theater, La Jolla Playhouse, Yale Rep, and so many more. Amanda was named an American Theater Magazine Person to Watch and was featured on the cover of Equity News with her very busy and very adorable toddler named Jack, among countless other articles and interviews. She received her MFA from the Yale School of Drama and her BA from San Francisco State University. Amanda is a full-time faculty member at Ithaca College, where she teaches stage management and production courses. I met Amanda at Williamstown, where she gave a life-changing workshop about stage management, networking, and dairy farming, among many other topics. Amanda, thank you so much for joining me today.
Hi, thanks for having me.
How are you holding up during quarantine?
What a surreal time that we're in, right? From the beginning, really made the decision to embrace it as a gift, and that's not always easy. There are some days that are harder than others, and certainly have had, personal interactions with people, who are close to me who had COVID of varying degrees of intensity, and navigating that. And it's hard, it's really hard, but I really do think it's a gift, and I think we'll be foolish as a species if we don't get on board with that thinking. But I'm happy to say that a lot of people who I interact with are. I mean, again, it's tricky. It's like the boat keeps rocking, but I think a lot of people that I am blessed to have in my life and that I collaborate with are really looking at it in the same way as an opportunity. And I am on the native lands of Cayuga Nation, the Haudenosaunee and the Susquehannock here in, I'm a little bit outside of Ithaca today, but I'm near Ithaca, New York.
Amazing. You
Yeah.
are the first guest to acknowledge your native lands, and I thank you for that.
Mhm.
Um, I want to get started by talking about kind of your early years and your journey to stage management. When did you find out what stage management was? How did you get started in entertainment and the arts industry?
Yeah, thanks. Good question. So I was a singing blueberry muffin when I was 5 years old in a very important holiday spectacular called Something Amazing. I'm not really sure what it was called, but I was really proud of my role as a singing blueberry muffin. The entire kindergarten class, I wasn't special. The entire kindergarten class was blueberry muffins. But I really was like, this is fantastic. Like, how cool is this to have all these people in this room together in, the holidays and singing, various food products, singing songs to them and stuff. So that was really my first interaction with the performing arts. And I watched a lot of television as a kid, and my mom is always like slightly ashamed when I say that. And I'm like, no way, television was so great and still can be. Because when I was a kid, I realized that most of the homes that I went into, the TV set was like this central storytelling device. It was a way for the whole world to connect and like watch some things. Sadly, some of the earliest things that I remember being aware that the whole world was watching would be like Princess Diana's funeral, or 9/11, sadly. But it's this outlet inside your house that lets everyone connect in this way, even though you're not in the same place. And I have to tell you, we did not have the internet when I was a kid. So,
What?
right? I
What?
know. Thank you for acting surprised, Claire. So, when I was a kid and I really liked this idea of connecting with people and congregating and having performing arts, but this way to connect with people when you can't congregate, I always saw the television as that. So I watched a lot of classic TV like Dick Van Dyke, Mary Tyler Moore, and I watched a lot of things like Roseanne, which is controversial now, but at the time was a really incredible television show. I love the Golden Girls, and I also watched a lot of QVC, and I loved QVC because I would get home from school by myself and I would turn it on and it was live. There was really like very little delay. And so I felt like there were people in the house with me, which is why my mom hates when I tell this story. However, I saw stage managers being depicted in episodes of Roseanne and Golden Girls, but they were always depicted as like grumpy men who wore flannel. They like always wore flannel. And so I sort of was aware that there were people who were doing the work to make productions happen. But obviously, there wasn't any sort of like pause in the story of the Golden Girls, that like 22 minutes of the story of Golden Girls to be like, this is what Lou does, right? But what's interesting is that I was simultaneously obsessed with QVC, which I later, like as an adult, toured the studios and cried, truly cried, because I was like, ah, this is the place where the magic was happening. But when I was younger, I just thought it was happening. I mean, it makes me sound sort of foolish, but I thought it was just happening. I didn't really think about the fact that Lou, Grumpy Lou in his flannel from the Golden Girls, was an actual job that people were doing. So anyway, to make a long story short, when I was in high school, I auditioned for a high school production of Tom Stoppard's Arcadia, and I did
Amazing.
not get cast. But because there was no internet really yet, like people were starting to get it in their homes, you had to go to the actual theater and look at the cast list on the door, and you would like run your finger down it, like in old television shows, right? You'd run your finger down it, and then at the bottom it was like stage manager Amanda Spooner. What the fuck is that? Because I just didn't know. Anyway, so I learned very quickly by doing Arcadia, and then I did the spring musical State Fair after that. I learned very quickly that the stage manager is really sitting in the intersection of everything. They're sitting in the intersection of ideas and how to implement those ideas. And I was a very reactionary stage manager because I didn't know what the heck I was doing, right? So I didn't really know how to prep for a rehearsal process or analyze text or anything like that. But I very quickly picked up on the fact that, oh, I just have to read the room and have a sense of what's coming next. And the further I can get ahead of it, which of course I hit that wall where you got too far ahead of it and you had to like come back. But it was like the more that I can get ahead of it and have some sort of preparatory thought about what's coming up, the better off that the production is going to be, and I can serve it in that way. And I felt like I was so respected and a part of the collaboration, and that it was a very vital role, and we know that it is. So that's how I got into it. And then I really was a kid who, I was a Girl Scout, I was in 4-H, I played every sport including golf. I never played soccer though,
I
but I
love golf. We stand golf on this podcast.
You're lucky I
Continue.
know what "we stand" means, by the way. Even though it's a song from my generation, but somehow more on that later. That's a different
Yes.
conversation.
Yes, yes.
But I played all the sports. I danced. I did all the things, and slowly but surely they sort of fell away out of my schedule. But the thing that stayed was theater. So yeah, that's where it started. I think that's what you asked, but that's really where it started.
Yeah, that's amazing. And then when you did it in theater, was there when you did it in high school, was there thoughts of like, oh, I could go to college for this at that time for you?
I mean, I'll admit I was sort of a wild teenager, so I put very little thought into anything after the age of 18. I really was just living, I mean, I was like a human Kesha song. Like everything was like the very last night of existence, this place about to blow. Like I was always, even though I was simultaneously falling in love with this job that had all this incredible responsibility and forethought, I was living my life very much like in the moment. I had the worst case of FOMO. I never slept then. I don't sleep now. Like I was just very much, and because my mom will probably watch this, we'll leave it at that. But I was like very alive when I was a teenager. I just didn't think about it. I just never thought about it. I think at one point I thought, I really like movies and television, and so maybe I'll work in that. But there was just no conceptualizing because I have a pretty good memory, and I can remember exactly how I felt at certain points in my life. And I just remember being like, oh, that'll just happen. Like there's no conceptualizing how one makes that happen, but that'll just happen. So it's kind of interesting. But I ended up going to community college, and I cannot endorse community college enough. I loved community college because for somebody who was a teenager that had fallen in love with something but really couldn't connect the dots. I have wonderful parents, but they don't work in the entertainment industry, and there wasn't really anyone around me who did. So when I started college, it was like I have these general ed things I have to do in college because I was raised in a working class, privileged, white suburban home in California. I just assumed I was going to college. There was no question that I was going to college. So when I signed up for college, I was, doing like the general ed. I had took PE. I took yoga. I somehow failed it. I failed yoga. My students were watching this. I failed yoga. But I just started taking those classes. And then when you could sign up for arts classes that were required for your degree, because I did get an associate's degree, I was like, oh, theater. And then they were like, oh, you like stage management? And I was like, I like what I think stage management is. And so then the ball just kept rolling. And I just fell more deeply in love with it.
That's amazing. We talk kind of a lot about community college and associate's degrees on this podcast, and I too cannot recommend them enough highly. If I could do my whole education journey again, I would have gotten an associate's in business or something outside of theater completely to inform so much more about my theater work. So it's really heartening to me to hear you, of all people, say that. So continuing on your educational degree, you are a alumni of the Yale Mfa Program. I'd love to hear about your decision to go to Yale and what your experience was like there.
Sure. So after I finished community college, I transferred to San Francisco State in San Francisco. And they have a really wonderful, I believe they still do, technical theater program. And again, I was just sort of hurtling through life, but was starting to recognize out on the horizon that like, oh, what I study now, what I experience now is all perhaps building toward a goal. It was amazing. We broke through in her post-adolescence. So I went to San Francisco State, and I very soon after transferring was given the opportunity to stage manage a show. I had an instructor in community college named Earl Weaver, who some of you now have him as a professor in the University of Central Florida. He is amazing, and he totally changed my life. He was teaching an acting class that I was taking for my associate's degree, and he asked me to be his stage manager for the first professional show that I ever did in San Francisco. And I said yes, and then I learned more, and then I did another one with him, and I learned more. And when I transferred to San Francisco State, I was working a lot outside of school. And I was very often working on drag shows, like musicals that have drag queens in them. And that was really where I learned how to be a stage manager. I mean, I had those early days of making props and carrying around a clipboard in high school, but where I really learned the art of stage management and artful management was working with drag performers in San Francisco. And for my 21st birthday, they turned me into a faux drag queen, which was super fun. So I had experience of being a performer, and I did that for a little over a year in various venues around San Francisco. And so I had the experience of being a performer. That's sort of the last time, other than being a professor, because being a professor is performative in the
Sure.
classroom often. But that was sort of the last performance experience I had. But I think that learning, sort of cutting your stage management teeth in the performing arts in the drag scene in San Francisco, but probably anywhere, means that you just have to read the room and be present. You can't, like, you can plan all you want to, but that is truly like the Muppet Show, and you just have to be present and ready to roll. And they very seldom, depending on the show, there's some shows where the performers do stick to the script. But if you're doing like a drag cabaret actor or whatever the case may be, if I'm stage managing it, I have to be totally invested in the fact that it could go anywhere, because the improv is such a huge element of drag performance in that way, where it's not like a formal musical or anything like that. So I think it just really set the tone for the way that I looked at stage management. And that is that you take the job seriously, but don't take yourself seriously, right? And I learned so much, and I had such kind, generous collaborators. And I realized I really love it and I want to do it. But San Francisco at the time, and I think still is, was a moonlighting theater city. So if you wanted to be an equity stage manager, you had to wait for like the three gainfully employed equity stage managers in the Bay Area to die or retire. Like if they, if they didn't get out of the way, you weren't going to be gainfully employed in a way that you ever made your insurance weeks, or you could pay those, skyrocketing Bay Area rents. And I thought, I just really want to be somewhere where it's an industry. And the work that performers do in San Francisco is amazing, but I want to be somewhere where it is truly an industry, it's a beast, and that you can not easily, but you might have more opportunity to work, full time as a stage manager. So I knew I wanted to go to New York, and I thought, New York is very much an industry, and there's things at the time I didn't realize what I was talking about. But it was the union factor in it, right? And the contractual and the commercialism and all that stuff. And so I said, I don't think I'm ready to do that. I had done a show in New York, and I learned sort of, baptism by fire. And I was like, I need to understand more about what the expectations are, what the economy is. I'm very big on learning economy around things and resources. And I was like, I just need to know more about that. And so I'm going to go to grad school. I didn't know. I think I maybe knew like two people who went to grad school for stage management at the time. So I applied for 9 programs. Yale was the one I ended up going to. I picked Yale because it made me feel the most uncomfortable. I was like, oh, I don't belong here. All these people seem so smart and like so focused, and I still have glitter on my forehead from the last drag show I was doing. Like I felt So like I was in some Rachel Lee Cook movie and I was like, I can't, this is weird, like I don't belong here. But they're doing something right because it's the Yale School of Drama. So I interviewed, it was the last interview I did, and I was very relaxed in my interview. For example, the one of the questions that they asked was, what do you like to do to deal with stress during tech rehearsals? And I was like, oh, well, what I'm doing right now, and I meant this with all sincerity, is I said I'm making prank phone calls to places like McDonald's and trying to make reservations. And there was a silence in the room, and I was like, ooh, in my head, I was like, too honest, back away, back away. And I was like, nope, gonna own it. And I was like, that is literally what I've been doing because it fits well in a 10-minute break. And it usually, not always, makes the person who answered the phone laugh because they realize, like, they think you're serious and then they realize you're joking. And that was my thing. And to this day, Mary Hunter, who was the chair of the program at Yale at the time, is still like, do you remember? And I was like, I'll never forget it. I'll never forget it because I was sitting there in like a suit and a blazer. Like, I don't wear that, right? Stuff, sorry, beep.
It's
But I
okay.
was
It's
like
okay.
sitting there and, with my portfolio and my, binder from my last show. And I was sitting there and I just remember in my head going, well, just own it because you said it and it's out there, so just own it. And I think that's was the beginning of a really what blossomed into a beautiful relationship with my professors there. And why I went, it's exactly what I just said. It's I saw it as a way to get closer to the industry that I wanted to be a part of, and that it wasn't going to be a second job that I had, which there's nothing wrong with that. I just didn't want to do that. And I really, for me personally, saw New York as the way to do that. And I don't ever regret that decision. I'm so glad I did it. But Yale also made me feel like a theater artist. The way that the Yale program operates is that you're a stage manager, but people have such great respect and admiration for what everyone else is doing, all the different majors, that it doesn't, I truly felt like a theater artist. I felt like I went to the coolest theater camp for 3 years, and it was hard, but it was that good kind of hard where you're just like, oh, I love it, and this is hard for everyone, kind of like COVID. You're like, oh,
Yeah,
this is
yeah.
hard for everyone. It somehow makes it easier to navigate. And yeah, I just really love my classmates and I love my professors, and I left there really feeling like an artist who is a storyteller, but just has a very specific, set of tasks that are usually assumed of me in my role as stage manager.
Sure. There's so much there that's good, and I can't even unpack it because we'll be here for hours.
Yeah.
But I wanted to ask, during your time at Yale and in San Francisco, and then your kind of early career years outside of Yale, who were your early mentors? How did you connect with these people? And then kind of like who became your artistic collaborators at that time that maybe you still work with to this day?
I mean, we definitely have to give it up for Carol Hovey, my high school drama teacher. I'm not totally sure that she and I would have the same definition of stage managers at this point in time. But she looks exactly the same. I see her every once in a while. She looks exactly the same. But that woman, I mean, I really, if working with drag performers was boot camp, she was like the orientation for it because she was a one person machine. Like she, as many high school drama teachers are. I mean, she was like begging, borrowing, stealing to like make these huge productions happen, calling in favors. I mean, her commitment was just, I of course couldn't articulate this at the time or recognize it, but it's just so moving when you think about the fact that she stays in one place and all these high schoolers sort of move through over the years, and they have different levels of respect and engagement, with her. But that person was like a machine. And I'm so thankful for that. And Earl Weaver, of course, because he was a director that I worked with, teaches acting. He's the one who's at UCF. His expectations of himself are just so crystal clear and so high, and he's, takes care of himself, has great respect for himself, but it's, even his opening night cards are like the most exquisite handwritten opening night cards that are so moving, and you're like, oh, I'm so tired, I like worked so hard to open the show, and then you get handed this envelope that's like beautifully handwritten. You're like, how did you get the time? But it's just, he has these expectations of the work he does, and he's so generous that he just keeps finding that energy. He has this motor in him, so much like Carol Hovey. And then Donna Drake is a director that I worked with early on, who is based in New York, but she and I worked together in San Francisco, and she was one of those people who really instilled in me that you want to do something, go do it. Like if you have a dream, go do it. There's tons of people in the world that all have their own dreams, and you want to be aware of the collective. But if you want something, be generous, be kind, and go do it, because there's nothing stopping you. Like you watch these people on television talking about their jobs and the things that you aspire to do. There's no reason you can't do that. And so I really owe that to her, my drag mom, Trauma Flintstone, and the producers that I ended up living with in San Francisco, Richard Winchester and Mark Sargent, were really, people that I collaborated with. And again, reinforced that idea that if you want to do something, just go do it. Start asking around. Like don't wait for the invitation. Just go and be a part of, make yourself a part of it. And then Matthew Melchior is a stage manager who's still, in New York City. He went and taught outside of the city for a while,
For
but he's
me,
back
my
in.
former professor.
Yes, and he's amazing. And
The
he
best.
was so patient, like what a patient, smart human being. And I assisted him a lot in my early years, and I'm so thankful for him. I still, I talk to him every once in a while, but I still see my Matthew Melchiorisms in my in what I do.
Same
And I look
here.
back on it and I'm like, gosh, that was so kind of him to like be so invested in our relationship and so patient. And again, had those sort of expectations that were like, yeah, we're doing a big musical. Come on, let's do it. Like maybe you've never had experience doing that before, but somehow the experience with the drag queens translated to being able to do these
Yes.
shows with him. So it was good. It was really good.
Amazing. When did you join Equity in the midst of all of this early days of Amanda Spooner?
The early days of Amanda Spinner. I had worked on a couple of union contracts in the early days of Amanda Spooner. I had gone on, like an AGVA tour and stuff like that. And I didn't join. I think it was probably in the process of applying to grad school already when I was on that tour. And I was like, man, I'll join later. I was always sort of hesitant to join Equity because I was afraid of what it was going to prevent me from doing in the early days of Amanda Spinner. So I was nervous about it. And I ended up deciding to go to Yale once they, offered me a spot in the class of 2009. And at Yale, if you don't have your card, you not always, but generally end up getting the opportunity to join Equity with your thesis production at Yale Repertory Theater. So that's what I did in the fall of 2008. Everybody keeps posting these emails that they're getting about their Equity anniversary. And I'm like, when's mine coming? It must be coming soon. So I'm excited about that. But even when I joined, I had no idea what the hell that meant. I mean, you don't learn a lot. If any of my high school teachers are watching this, they're going to be like, she's a liar. You don't, I didn't retain a lot, that's a better way to put it, about the labor movement at all. Like, not like at all. And I'm convinced that most people, I think everyone really, that we interact with these days, that they were born and the labor movement had already started and labor unions already existed. I mean, Equity, was formed in 1913. So, but really the point is that we didn't watch the development of it. We didn't see the need for it. So I didn't value it in 2008 the way that I do now. And I started to go, oh, we don't really understand the value of it until we don't have it, sadly, with structures like that, that predate us. So, yeah.
That's kind of a beautiful segue into a topic that I am personally invested in, being a member of Equity for maybe less than a year still at this point, but also working as a production assistant on many Equity shows on a non-union contract. And so much of I'm a daughter of a electrician, concrete cutter union member, and a teacher. So unions have been very important to me my entire life, and I've like provided my healthcare, provided benefits for my parents to make me the person I am today. What are your thoughts on kind of the PA situation right now, and kind of this underprotected group within a unionized industrial complex? I think one of our past guests called
Yeah, it's wow, how shocking that you're asking me about this, Claire.
it.
I've really been, I use obsessed as a word too often, but I've been pretty obsessed with the production assistant situation, specifically in New York City, which is, where I do most of my professional work as a stage manager. And since 2017 really is when it first started. For me, my sort of obsession with it, because I realized I was doing my first Broadway show and I realized that the production assistant, the wonderful Veronica Lee, when she left, when we opened, her tasks became my tasks. And I was like, hey, wait a second. I didn't mind it, liked doing that stuff. But I was like, so what makes that not the work of a stage manager? Veronica, I think she was a member at the time, but most PAs on Broadway at any given moment are members of Actors Equity Association. And I was like, huh, that's weird. She's been acting as a second ASM this whole time, and that just feels wrong to me that she's on the highest minimum contract, which is the production contract in Actors Equity Association. Why is she doing this work without a contract? And the producer was Daryl Roth, a wonderful producer, and was paying Veronica at the time a remarkably high wage. I don't want to misquote it, but I think it was maybe $600-700 a week, but there were no benefits attached. And what's really sad is that I say at the time it was a remarkably high wage because like 2 years prior to that, people were still PAing for like $250 a week on Broadway, which is absurd. And obviously, I don't need to say it to any of the people listening to this, but clearly that builds barriers to entry for
Yeah.
anyone who doesn't have the means to pay to play. But it's not right. It's not right. You can't have members, Actors Equity Association members, say, I'm not going to take work that is, in the jurisdiction without a contract and then say, oh, but don't look over here because over here we've just been ignoring I, a system where people to get into the highest paying market in the United States in Actors Equity Association's jurisdiction, this backdoor is there for people who have the means to work on these low wages without benefits and they're members or not members, like eventual members. Here's this backdoor for them to be doing the work of stage managers but not be on stage manager contracts. It to me it's just so simply wrong that I have a hard time understanding when people don't see that. Then I was elected to council. Then I learned more about Actors Equity Association from the inside, and I learned more about contract negotiations, and I get smarter every day about it, thankfully, thanks to people like Erin Maureen Custer and Ira Mont and Marjorie Horn and Ruth Kramer, I love her, and Lisa Dawn Cave, like everyone who's a stage manager and has been elected to council, and are also helpful in helping me understand it. There's a lot of different opinions about it. I think one of the things that I learned, working with like Maddie DiCarlo, for example, who's truly one of the best stage managers I've ever worked with and became a close friend in our endeavors together. He tries to be, and I think he is, careful to not assign production assistants work that's the work of the stage managers. But without a definition, it's extremely hard to identify exactly what that is. Without a definition or a job description that's protected in contract language, it's extremely hard to file for overtime. It's hard to put boundaries in to protect ourselves. And because it's a freelancing sort of situation for most people, you're always trying to find ways, whether you're doing it consciously or not, to make yourself marketable and hireable because your livelihood depends on it. So that's why I think Actors Equity Association as a labor union needs to start putting fences in. We sort of did in the last renegotiation of the production contract, but it's not enough. And what's hard for me is, I won't name the show, but in the last year, I met a young person who's a remarkable young stage manager who was talking about their internship on a very famous, long-lasting musical in New York City. And in their own words, said, oh, I was an intern there for a short period of time, and I did things like ran rehearsal, I gave clears on deck. And I was like, oh, interesting. You mean you ran rehearsal like somebody was in there with you and giving you this incredible opportunity as an intern? And they were like, no, I mean, I ran rehearsal. And they said, and they believed this, and this is a smart, incredible young stage manager, said, well, because it's been running so long, the rules are different. And I'm like, no, no. And I didn't, it wasn't the time or place to say, no, they're not. But if you're watching this, you know who you are. No, they're not. They're not any different. Like, you shouldn't be running rehearsal as someone who's a extremely temporary intern on a huge blockbuster musical. No, no, sorry, that's not. And Actors Equity Association has to be the entity that goes in and clears that up for people. And in this conversation, we're only talking about New York. Out in the West, it's a completely different situation. And what has been really helpful about this time that we have together and that we're spending virtually in the great pause, as I like to call it, is that I'm learning more and more that stage managers in Los Angeles, for example, are like, what do you mean you can be an equity member and be a PA? Like, how's that even possible? It's not possible out here. And I'm like, well, how the heck is it possible in New York City on the highest paying contract? And it's not possible out there. So I think that the conversations we're having, the connective tissue we're building in the Great Pause, and everybody's making an effort to show up even when they're exhausted from the conversations. They're, within reason, finding ways to show up and stay connected. I think the more that we communicate, the stronger ideas we're going to get about how to deal with that, because I don't think it's as cut and dry as creating a production assistant contract that has a lower minimum than everyone else, but that you can get health and pension, the employers making health and pension contributions into the fund when you work on that contract. And I think it was Erin Maureen Koster who pointed it out and said, if you do that, then all of a sudden are the understudies going to be negotiated at, this lower, much lower paying contract, like PAs, and so Erin really inspired me to, the boat that I'm currently in is that if it just needs to be a second ASM contract on plays, and it needs to be a third ASM contract on musicals. And when the show opens, then you reassess if you need that person or not as a producer in conjunction with the stage management team and the union. And then if you don't, then they hopefully become the sub, in the current model that we have. But I don't think it's easy to answer, but I certainly have feelings about it. Jacob Plummer did an incredible amount of work collecting data, and continues to really use that as his platform when he runs for positions at Actors Equity, and to campaign for better protections for members who are trying to get into these markets, whether it's a LORT market or it's it's the production contract market on Broadway. They're trying to get in, so why wouldn't they try and get in that way? So whose responsibility is it to change it? I think it's a collective responsibility. I think PSMs have to behave the way in the way that Match Carlo behaves, and I think the union has to make some really clear choices and fences about it. And the union as an entity has to advocate on our behalf, because as freelancers, we're compromising too much with employers when we put our foot down. So it's tricky, but it's like that, I don't know if you've ever done this, Claire, but that group activity where you're supposed to pick up a hula hoop and everybody uses one finger, and
Oh
then you have
yeah.
to like move across the room, and you're like, how hard is that? This isn't going to be hard. And then you do it and you're like, oh, this is why we're doing this activity, because it's hard. And so I think it's the hula hoop finger trick.
Yeah, I mean, and if it was an easy solution, hopefully we would already have an answer to it. So it takes time and it takes discussion from all sides,
Right.
which is another kind of segue into a great community building effort that you yourself created this past year, the Year of the Stage Manager. I'd
Yay.
love to talk about why did you create the Year of the Stage Manager? What did you see that was lacking in the entertainment industry landscape that spurred this on?
Yeah, I mean, it's, you're the stage manager 2020/21, right? Because now it's 18 months long. It's interesting. I've always been really, really, really interested in peer-to-peer education, even though I'm an educator in a formal setting for, undergraduate students who are amazing. But I have always, always been into the value of peer-to-peer education. Everybody's an expert in something. And so when I lived in New York City and I was teaching as an adjunct professor at Rider University in New Jersey, I was creating events in New York City that sometimes my students from Rider would come out for them, but mostly it was for people who were pre-professional, new professional, seasoned professional, or retired in New York City to come in and congregate and create space for conversation. That's truly all it was. We ended up calling it Tandem. It went on for about 5 years. We had contributors who contributed to conversations about programming and that sort of thing. And there was nothing like it. It's just so special. We did things like stage manager on stage manager speed dating, which was not romantic, although sometimes it ended up being romantic. But
I went once and I did feel some sparks in both ways. Just saying.
I love that. I mean, there's people who met roommates there, who met eventual frenemies there, who found people to work with there. I mean, it was a wild time. We'll still do it, obviously, in the great pause. We're figuring out the best way to do that in the virtual realm. But the point is that when we were having those events, it just became so clear that stage managers were each other's best resource, and especially with a country that's so geographically large and markets that are so totally different. But even in the New York City market, it can be so isolating being a stage manager because often there's only one or two of you on a show. There are like families of stage managers that sort of branch out, but when they branch out, they branch this way and they're not, so often crossing each other. Thanks for giving me the opportunity for visualization. So it, thanks, Claire. So these events were a way for people to mix it up and to actually just be in contact with different people. And uh, you know, that continued on social media. I mean, the events, if times were different, we'd still be doing them. But the conversation continued on social media. And I'm not shy about sharing my opinion. My opinion sometimes, is wrong, right? And people will say, hey, wait a second, you're missing a piece, or they'll change my mind or whatever. But I'm just not shy about it. I feel like ever since I was a kid, I'm just like, let's live in the truth of the moment. Even if the truth changes or develops or evolves, let's be forward about what we're thinking and about our vulnerability. That's not for everyone, but it's how I function. And Lindsay Jones, who's a sound designer, who's one of the sound designers who was instrumental in reinstating the sound design Tony, and he and John Gramada run the collaborator party that happens every year nationwide. He saw what I was talking about on Facebook and he reached out and he said, hey, I have a thought. I feel like, and then that conversation developed into him suggesting that I just declare that 2020 is the year of the stage manager. And I was like, can we do that? And he's like, who's going to tell you no? And I was like, yeah, true. But the point being that it was going to be an umbrella campaign, and it has been an umbrella campaign that's bigger than Actors Equity Association. It's bigger than the SMA, although the SMA, the Stage Managers Association, is amazing. That it's bigger than all of these institutions, these organizations, that it's a big giant orange umbrella that we're just opening up for a finite amount of time. And we're saying, hey, everyone, just take a second and think about stage managers because we especially, God, this pause has shown us this, right? We so seldom actually stop and go, oh, that's what you do. Okay, great, moving on, even though we collaborate with each other a lot. So he was like, just make the year about stage managers, make it a year that people are getting an education about what stage managers do. make it a year where stage managers are being celebrated, make it a year where you're, connecting with stage managers and making visible stage managers in a way that you never did before. So I was working on a piece that's since been edited, so I can share this with you, Claire.
Yeah.
I come from a town called Livermore, California. It's home of the longest burning light bulb. It's been burning for over 100 years. And some of these light bulbs still exist. That one in particular is called the Centennial Light, and it's been, or the Centennial Bulb, the name. It did not exist a few years ago. It's new. But this the Centennial Bulb has been burning in a firehouse in Livermore, California, the longest, right on record. And the reason that light bulbs don't do that anymore is because of a little device called planned obsolescence, right? So the way that light bulbs are designed now is they're designed to only exist for a certain amount of time so that you as a consumer will buy more. And then when you do buy more, you're always looking for better, more innovative light bulbs, right? It makes consumers hungry for something that's, new and better and a replacement. That's how it works here in the United States and in most places where there's commerce, right?
Yeah.
So I was writing an article that I think is still helpful in illustrating this, even though we took it out of the article, that stage managers are like that longest burning light bulb. That light bulb is still just warm glow, going strong. You can picture stage managers in the wings with their flashlights, right? It's still going strong. You're the stage manager is like a brand new bright light bulb. So bright that you kind of wouldn't want it around longer than its expiration, right? So it's like just cranking up the lights really bright and then losing that one, right? By design, you're the stage manager goes away. We leave some spots in people's vision, right? You can still
Yeah.
see
Yeah.
traces
Yeah.
of that really bright light that was there. And yet all the while, this oldest burning, longest burning light bulb is still burning, and that's the stage management community. And those little spots we see are the spots of change, right? It's saying, oh, we're going to credit stage managers now when we credit designers and we put out press releases. Oh, we're going to think about stage managers when we're thanking people when we win awards, right? Oh, we're going to think about stage managers when we're negotiating contracts. Gee, maybe we'll change the name of Actors Equity Association so that it is no longer totally excluding stage managers that are a huge important part of this labor union, right? So that all of those things, hopefully, as the spots are still there and the lights are up bright, hopefully all those things happen so that in 5 years, in 10 years, people go, you're the stage manager. What are you talking about? Why would we ever need a year of the stage manager? We're all so aware of what stage managers do. We celebrate them. We're so educated about what their job is like. And we're thinking about them when we're making choices for the industry as a whole. That's the dream. Please forget about it, right? So let this long burning light bulb glow, but this bright one, it's going to be a finite amount of time. It's going to expire by design. And so that's, I'm getting ahead of the questions that you wanted to ask me, but that's
Oh,
the story of You're the
yeah.
Stage Manager.
I love the idea of afterglow as a concept is so inspiring to me. And like in my creative work in my free time, I journal a lot about the idea of afterglow and how your impact resonates long after you're gone. I'm getting very deep into something I've never shared with anyone. So here, internet, you can have that. You talk about celebrating stage managers, and
Mm-hmm.
I think one of the coolest ways that you have ever celebrated stage managers is in your bio for Indecent in the playbill. You listed and thanked every stage manager who had touched Indecent throughout its process.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell me what the process of Indecent was like for you? I know that you worked with one of your main artistic collaborators and love affairs. When did you join the process, and what was it like bringing that show to Broadway?
That's a great question. And thanks for reading that bio. I love that bio. It was my favorite
It's
bio.
the best. I cried. I have a lot of feelings, but I cried. Okay,
Oh, I'm glad. I'm really glad. It felt important. So for those who don't know Indecent, it is a play that was conceptualized by Rebecca Teichman, who is one of my closest artistic collaborators. It was, and just, a dear friend. it was conceptualized by her as her thesis project over 20 years ago at the Yale School of Drama. We were not at Yale together. People often think we were, and I'm like, I don't know if that's a compliment for her because she looks so young, or the opposite for me because I look that much older. But I'll take it. I'm happy to be in the same class as her. But we were not, alas. But when she did her thesis project at Yale, she, had read Sholem Asch's The God of Vengeance, and was exploring how to theatricalize that and present it as her thesis project. Over the years, she, was growing obviously as a director, an artist in her professional life. And I think it was Bill Rausch said, I think it was Bill Rausch said, you should give this material to Paula Vogel and partner with Paula Vogel and see, what could come of it. And Rebecca was like, Paula Vogel, I can't partner with Paula Vogel. She's never going to want to work on this. Like, we can do Paula Vogel. Are we speaking the same language here? Like, what are you saying? Fast forward through time, the two of them did collaborate on it, obviously. And I was doing my first show with Rebecca as the PSM on Marie Antoinette by David Adjemi. It's a beautiful play by David Adjemi. And we were doing it was a co-pro at ART and at Yale Repertory Theater. And when we did it at ART, then we went to Yale. And while I was running at Yale, Rebecca and Yale had decided to do a reading of this play at the time. It eventually was Indecent, but it was called Rehearsing Vengeance. And they said, there's this reading, and do you want to do it while this show's running? And the reading will be in New York, but the show's running in New Haven. And I said, sure, I don't know anything about it, but I like working with Rebecca a lot, so sure, I'll go. So I was commuting down to the city to do it. And so I was with it from its very first reading with actors in 2012. I still have that script. I'm such a nerd that my birthday last
Oh,
year, when I was in LA with the show on its tour at the Amundsen, for my birthday, Ben Cherry, who has been in many productions of Indecent at this point, he's an incredible actor and friend. We read out loud the old script from 2012 because it's just like, I mean, that show from 2012 all the way until the London production, really, in 2020 that I was consulting on. It was just so much part of my life, right? Like, it's by the time we went to Broadway in 2017, it was the oldest play because I work almost exclusively on new plays and musicals. It was the oldest play I had been working on when we went to Broadway, and I just am, was so deeply entrenched in the development of it and working with Paula. And what I was saying earlier, and I interrupted myself, was that the main character in Indecent, for those who don't know it, it's an ensemble show, but there's a main narrative character, sort of a narrative character, Lemmel, and he's a stage manager. And Paula Vogel used to be a stage manager. So when she wrote the play, Lemmel's not a real person, but she was putting a lot of the story and the real events that do take place in the story of the God of Vengeance and Sholem Asch. She was putting these pieces into Lemmel, who in a lot of ways is like the manifestation of the spirit of the play, The God of Vengeance. And I just was like, it was just one of those beautiful things that I know a lot of people witnessed, but to work on it was just is such an honor. And it still is, it's still so exciting to see other productions of it happening and stuff. So to answer your question, I was on it, the whole time from the first reading and then consulting on the London production because I was doing another show with Rebecca in the United States. And that list of stage managers that was in my bio in the Playbill program, all of those stage managers over the years either were production assistants on it, they did it, as ASMs on labs. They did it at Sundance. Sundance at the time didn't hire equity stage managers, so the only reading I didn't do was the reading at Sundance. But then I did the Sundance New York readings of it. I had a baby in there, so when I had my baby, one of my best friends, Terry Kohler, took over for me at the Vineyard by design. I mean, we knew I was pregnant, so it was
Shocker.
it was by design. But he came early, my little guy, and so so our plans, Terry was just incredible, and being adaptable, and came to the hospital, and we prepped in the parents' lounge, and I went to a week of rehearsals because Terry, I was supposed to be there, and Terry was on another show in New York Theater Workshop, and so I went to that first week of rehearsals to get him started, and my son was in the NICU, and the nurses were so happy to get me out of the NICU because they were like, "Your son's gonna be fine. He just has to cope a
Oh,
little while longer. Like, get out of here." And so I went to rehearsal a week after I had him. But then I took time off to be with him, and just spent time with him. So I was really thankful for that. But yeah, so that's that long list. And then in LA, where our tour was Boston and LA, but in LA, my bio, I updated it with all the stage managers, who had worked on that production. And then in that bio, like I said, it was my favorite bio. It was so wonderful being able to list all of those stage managers, and then also, of course, celebrate the subsequent productions that happened after it. So I think Indecent's always going to be a part of my life. My son responds to klezmer music like nobody's business because he heard it a lot in the womb. And when he sees Richard Topol, who played Lemel, he always looks at him like, and I'm like, yes, you heard that man talk a lot the whole time that you were in my belly. And so it's I love that it's a part of his story too, which is great.
that's beautiful.
Yeah.
I want to respect your time because we're going a little over, but I did want to ask if there was any production story you would like to share to close out the pod.
Production story. What to share. I mean, I saw that, full disclosure, everyone. Claire sent me the questions ahead of time. I saw that, and I was thinking about it, and this is my favorite, but I'm not going to say the name of the play. I'm not going to say the name of the actors involved or the theater. We'll see if I can actually make it through with not ever saying it.
Great.
So I was doing a show, and I was calling it in a booth, and it was a house that was maybe like 150 seats, something like that. And it was a nonprofit theater, and that's important, and you'll see why. There was a sound that suddenly came over the monitor that was the room feed, and it sounded like snoring. And I was like, God, this plays like a comedy. Um, who's snoring? I mean, it happens, right? But I'm like, God, I can hear snoring. And the cast could hear the snoring as well, obviously. And so they would go off stage when they had like exits, and they would say to the ASM, like, hey, there's this snoring that's happening in the house. And the house has like a really steep rake. And so there's really not a lot that you can do that's not going to be disruptive, right, to what's going on. So in that show, we had an intermission. And I was like, no problem. I'll talk to the house manager. So I talked to the house manager, one of the business's best house managers. And I said, hey, friend, like this person's snoring. And because I by then could figure out like who it was. And he said, oh, yeah, that's one of the biggest donors of this nonprofit theater company that you're working for. And I was like, I hear you, but the cast is fit to be tied, and I don't blame them because it is loud, right? So we have to have a plan. And so he went over there and like talked to her, and he was like, it's so obvious that you are not feeling well, or that you're tired or whatever. Um, I wish I could have been there for that conversation, but I went backstage and was talking to the actors in the dressing rooms, being like, I assure you that this is gonna stop, right? So he was like, I know that you're here tonight, and I'm so glad you are, but let's get you tickets for another night. She refused to leave. And she said to him, I have this medication that I'm on. And he's like, okay. And the person who was sitting behind her, because she was there by herself, the person who was sitting behind her was like, I'll make sure that if she falls asleep, I'll give her a little nudge. And it's like, okay, right? So he says, okay. He tells me this over the radio, and I was like, no, no, no. We have to put like an usher next to her. Like, I hear what you're saying, that she's a donor. You like can't kick her out. I like get all that. But you have to put like an usher next to her if you can. Sitting on the steps, it's probably illegal because of fire code, but whatever, like it to like escort her out or wake her up, like it's so loud, right? He goes, yeah, yeah, that's a good idea. So he does it. So we make it like three-quarters of the way through Act Two. We're almost there. You can like see the finish line. And it's like this comedy got serious, right? Of course, in the like last quarter of the
Of
second
course.
act. It takes its serious turn and you just hear over the monitor. And I was like, "Oh
Oh
my
man.
goodness!" But we're gonna get there. We're gonna get there. We're gonna get through this. Like, and I'm like trying to, and it's the kind of house that you can't like. They can't be on their walkies, right? Because it's so intimate and so like steeply raked, and you're like, like poke her, like wake her up, like what are you doing? And I'm like, no. And so one of the actors exits and says to the ASM, I'm gonna hold the show. Like if you don't, and he it was a staged exit, but he was like, I'm gonna hold the show. If you don't hold the show, if you don't tell her to hold the show, if you don't remove this person, like I'm gonna hold the show. And the ASM was a really wonderful ASM, and she was like, oh, we're so close. Like we're so close to the end. Let's just like get through it. We'll work it out later. He's like, fine. He goes back on stage. The penultimate like moment in the show is this big monologue that he gives, and I'm in the booth being like, oh thank God, like we're at this monologue, we're just gonna get through it. He starts giving this monologue, and in the middle of it, he looks up at the booth and he goes, I can't do it. I
Oh.
cannot do it, Spoons. I can't. I don't get paid enough. I don't get paid enough for this. I can't do it. This is ridiculous. And then this actress like came downstage and like started like stomping her foot at the person who was sleeping and like clapping her hands and was like, wake up. And he was like this, and he was just like standing in this light looking up at the booth and was like, I can't. I can't. I don't get paid enough. Like I can't do it. I can't do it. And I'm like, I got over God Mike and I was like, we'll call him Joe. I was like, Joe, Joe, yes, Joe. We're gonna hold. We're gonna hold. Let's have the cast clear the stage. Let's bring the house lights up to half. Everyone stay in your seats. This is not an intermission. We're almost there. Cast, go ahead and clear the stage. Thank you. Thanks, Joe. Thank you. And we'll get started again in just a second, right? So there's like the crowd's people murmuring, right? But you can hear because the walls were all like photo treated fabric. You can hear this actor as he went off stage. Still, they weren't mic'd, but you can hear him. He's still going, I just, I can't. I just can't. Like, he's just so get paid enough. And over headset, I said, oh, can you tell him that we can all still hear him? And so the ASM was like, they can still hear you, and it stopped. It's like, okay, so the ushers carried her out. And while they were carrying her out, she said, do you know who I am? This is so embarrassing. I can't believe they like carried her out down house. And then I was like, all righty, friends, we're going to get started again. We're going to go from the top of that monologue. Thank you all for your patience. And here we go. Put the microphone down. The cast comes back out. He does the monologue. They do the last scene of the show. They get a standing ovation. Everybody, I'm like calling the executive director of the theater while I'm
Get on
like
the
calling
horn.
that part of the show because I'm just like, yo, like you gotta know that this happened, whatever. The executive director of the theater was totally like understood, like all fine. The actor felt horrible afterward. He was like, "Oh my God, what did I do?" And I was like, "It's totally. I'm glad you did it because I'll be telling this story on a podcast in 2020." I was like, "I'm so glad you did it." But it what was hysterical is I had friends there that night, and afterward we went out to a bar.
Good for you. You deserve it.
Oh, sure. Yeah, because it was a special occasion going out to the bar after a show. But we went out to the bar, and I said, "Can you believe like that? I've never. I mean, I've had some stuff happen, but like that, like never in my life." And my friend goes, "What do you mean?" And I was like, "The part where we held the show, and then this woman got carried out for snoring, and the actor was like, I don't make it weak enough,' and he was like." Did that happen? And I was like, okay.
What?
I was like, the show wasn't bad. It was a good show. I was like, I don't understand. And he was like, oh, he's like, I guess that did happen. He's like, well, you know what? It happened so seamlessly. I just like didn't even realize it. And I was like, what? So like the house lights came up. We like stopped the show. It was like me on the God mic. There was a like, what are you talking about? So anyway, that was just like the little cherry on top of all of it. I was like, but it's good. I was like, did you hate the play? And he was like, no, I really like the play. And I was like, I don't understand. I don't understand. So anyway, that's my story for you, and I'm sticking to it.
Wow. I'm going to think about that one for a while. Amanda, thank you so much for joining me today and
Thanks for
sharing all of your
having me.
stories and experiences. It was so
Yeah,
great. I
thank
had so
you.
much fun. With that, we have come to the end of episode 6 of the Stage Managers Supply Co. podcast. Once again, brought to you by Wallet Cards. Wallet Cards. I personally will never let these things go extinct. A huge thanks to Amanda for sharing her experiences with me, and a huge thanks to you for listening. One day I will become the Howard Stern of arts education, but until then, thank you for letting me improve and hone in on my interviewing chops. Again, if you would like to signal boost or support Planned Parenthood, their website will be linked in the episode description. If you enjoyed the podcast, please feel free to rate, review, and subscribe to us on your chosen podcast platform. Thanks again for listening, and I will catch you on the next one. Bye!